The playoffs start today, and the San Francisco Giants are not in them. That is a major failure for the organization and for Farhan Zaidi, who met with the media today to discuss the season and what is to come in the offseason, and we're going to break it all down next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspic, and on the show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I have been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. So check us out there, and please hit that subscribe button wherever it is that you're following the show. And coming up on today's show, yes, I listened to the entirety of the Farhan Zaidi interview. I don't know if you got a chance to do so as well, but he met with the media at 11 a.m. this morning in the dugout, in the Giants dugout. And there was a lot that he had to say. And the number one thing, the number one topic on everybody's mind, of course, is that Gabe Kapler was fired and the Giants are searching for a new manager. And so a lot of the questions that Zaidi was asked focused on the managerial search and what the timeline is and what kind of person he's looking for and all that kind of stuff. And so I'm just going to fill you in on some of what he said. In terms of the timeline, I'm not sure. I actually can't remember if he said they plan on interviewing a couple of internal candidates by the end of the week, but I think what he said was that by the end of the week they want to kind of zero in on the internal candidates they might wish to interview, and that early next week that they would start reaching out about reaching out for permission to interview current coaches or whatever from other teams, people who are under contract with other teams. And the way that the convention goes in baseball, it's kind of like an unwritten rule for front offices and for organizations in general. It's just, if the team that's asking for permission is offering the person a promotion, then the organization is supposed to grant permission for that person to interview. I hope that makes sense. And so, like, any position other than manager, any coaching position other than manager, it's going to be a promotion to be the manager. And so we're talking, Donnie Ecker and anybody who's not a current manager. And so it gets really interesting when we start thinking about who are the candidates, because Farhan Zaidi was also asked about his willingness to hire a first-time manager, and to me, just kind of reading the way that he said it, I kind of picked up on two things. Number one, he emphasized twice, including when asked about the possibility of recruiting and hiring a first-time manager, his emphasis was on the ability of the manager to recruit players to come play for the Giants. And it's interesting that he brings that up so often, and it kind of makes it seem like Gabe Kapler may have been a weak spot in that area, and that maybe certain players didn't want to come here because of Kapler. Like the fact that Farhan Zaidi keeps saying the new manager, that is like such an emphasis, is that we want someone who's going to be able to recruit players. And when we're talking about recruiting, we're talking about free agents, right? And the Giants have whiffed on a lot of high-profile free agents. What's ironic, though, I think back to Bryce Harper, and one of the reasons that Harper cited for choosing the Phillies was that he liked Gabe Kapler and he wanted to play for him. So too bad Kapler wasn't the manager here then, but with other players, maybe it's been an issue. But in terms of the candidates, like, he really balked at kind of sounding like he was super interested in hiring a first-time manager, but he said that, in certain cases there are some people out there who may have perhaps just finished off a career where they have a lot of credibility with players that they could be able to recruit and able to manage. Like, it's not just about recruiting. You also have to be able to manage. And Zaidi also said back in 2019 when they were interviewing for the open spot after Bruce Bochy left that he essentially hinted that managers the second time around have more success. And so if he believes that first-time managers are going to go through growing pains, and this is the last year of Farhan Zaidi's contract coming up, then I'm not sure it's the safe bet to go with somebody who's a first-time manager. And so if we're not talking first-time managers and we are talking ability to recruit, then who are we talking about? Well, I'm just looking through Alex Pavlovich's list of names of possible candidates, and one of the names that really does make more and more sense to me the more that I think about it is Bob Melvin. And I know that it's like an obvious. If Vegas put out odds on who's going to be the next Giants manager, I mean, Melvin would be, especially if Melvin was actually like a free agent, he would be probably at the top. But the issue is he still has 1 year left on his contract, and so there's a possibility he's just flat out not available. But Bob Melvin has a lot of credibility in the game. He is well respected in the game. He's established enough that he can push back if, on the front office. He can kind of provide a counterbalance potentially to the front office when necessary because he's in tune with the players. He's not just like a puppet for the front office. And that's kind of, I said it a few days ago, and I hate that term. It seems so derogatory or something, but that's kind of what Kapler was he was just an extension of the front office. And I think they're looking for someone who's a little bit more of an individual who can have their own opinions and views and kind of just have autonomy to make their own decisions. And so moving on through Pavlovich's list of potential names, Ron Wotus is mentioned. Ron Wotus would be a first-time manager, and I personally don't see it as the best fit. I think it's a little too far away from the kind of analytics side. I don't think you want to go extreme, quote-unquote, old school and match it with a Farhan Zaidi-led front office. I do believe that someone somewhere in the middle. Bob Melvin, by the way, worked with Farhan Zaidi in Oakland, and I view him as kind of someone somewhere in the middle. He's got tons of experience and enough autonomy and enough gravitas to make his own calls and be able to stand by them, and he's not going to be intimidated. Not that Ron Wotus would be intimidated, but I think he's further on the old school end. If you look at how the A's played, Melvin bought into that system, but I think he's also managed now the high profile Padres. And so I don't know, there is a good fit there. And I don't know, just continuing through the list, there's almost nobody on Pavlovich's list who wouldn't be a first-time manager. Buster Posey is mentioned, Will Venable, Joe Espada, Stephen Vogt, Clayton McCullough, Donnie Ecker, Mark Hallberg. The only one who has managerial experience on Pavlovich's list is Bob Melvin. And so it's going to be fascinating. This is it's going to be the main story for the next month is who is going to be the Giants' next manager. And then after that, it's going to be, and how do they fix this roster? And so coming up in just a minute, Farhan Zaidi talked about the season that the Giants just had and what their priorities are going to be over the winter. So we will get into it momentarily. And before we do, today's episode is brought to you by, oh my goodness, the most comfortable and good-looking pair of shorts I've ever had. Well, it's not the shorts that it's brought to you by, but Bird Dogs, the company that makes the shorts. They are the most comfortable and the best-looking pair of shorts that I have ever owned, hands down. And one of my favorite things is that with these promo codes, you can get these awesome items thrown in with your order. You see, if you're watching on YouTube, if you're not on YouTube, you have no idea what I'm talking about. But look at this white Bird Dogs tech hat that I would probably be wearing right now if it wasn't for the fact that it's a little bit sweaty because I've been using it playing tennis. And they also gave me this Yeti style tumbler. And right now, if you go to birddogs.com and enter birddogs.com/LockedOnMLB or enter promo code LockedOnMLB at checkout, you will get a free Bird Dogs water bottle. I haven't got mine yet, but I really want to because these other two items are awesome and the shorts are awesome. With your order, you'll get the water bottle. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnMLB for a free water bottle at checkout. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off, we promise you. Okay, as promised, we are going to get into the rest of what Farhan Zaidi had to say. I really kind of want to keep talking about the managerial opening, which I think, because going through that list, I pulled up the list before recording, but I didn't consider the fact that only one name mentioned is someone who has managerial experience. And so if we're talking guys who have managerial experience, then it's a very different looking list. But, Zaidi did say certain players who recently finished out their careers who have the respect of players around the game. When we look at the list, Buster Posey is on there, and that is hands down slam dunk for sure credibility immediately. Big time. And then I think Stephen Vogt would probably fall into that category. Maybe Will Venable as well, who's also on that list. But Posey more than anyone. But I don't think he wants to do it. Anyway, thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day, everydayers. Tomorrow on the show, the latest on the San Francisco Giants and their managerial search. More is going to be written and broken down about what Farhan Zaidi had to say meeting with the media today. Also, at some point, we are going to give Brandon Crawford his due farewell, although he hasn't announced what he's going to do. Is he going to retire? Well, Farhan Zaidi had something to say about that, which we'll get into a little bit later on today. So, basically, Zaidi also broke down the 2023 season and talked about 2024. And honestly, my takeaway was that there was a little bit of a lack of kind of admitting that it was a roster problem and that it wasn't just we fell apart when it mattered the most. It wasn't he didn't say anything. He was asked about strikeouts. He was asked about, the fact that they only had 2 starting pitchers going for large chunks of the season. He was asked about platoons, and he kind of defended all of those things. There was no, what I would have wanted to hear is something like, yes, we struck out too much. We swung and missed at pitches right down the middle of the plate too often. We took pitches right down the middle of the plate for called strike threes way too often. I didn't hear enough questions about the hitting coaches and about does the offensive collapse kind of land on Justin Veely and Dustin Lind? Is there accountability there? Because Kapler goes, I would imagine a new manager probably brings in almost an entirely new staff. And so we're in for a major offseason here, folks, and it's going to be a lot of fun covering it with you every day. But anyway, I did not love that there wasn't like an admission of just a failure of the roster, and that the basically he said a lot of the same stuff that he's been saying all along. And I just think that stuff that he's been saying all along hasn't proved to work consistently enough, or at all, really. There was one year in which they had success and the others they have not. And so like he's talking about, you're going to see a lot of playoff teams who are doing a lot of platooning, and there's a lot of playoff teams who are not. And so basically he's saying we're not like pro platooning everywhere or anti platooning everywhere. We just want to do whatever we can do to be able to win that day's game. Well, guess what? What you're doing is not working. You were under 500. You were just 500 last year. In 2020, they were, it was a short season, but under 500. And they've just got the 1 year to go on. But, this is the last year of Farhan Zaidi's contract. And so he's got to understand that he cannot just put out another team that fans aren't interested in. I mean, of course, the diehards are always going to back the team, but I think by and large, a lot of people are just kind of not that interested in this team. And he has to understand that, and that if he puts out another team like that in 2024, regardless of who's managing it, he's not going to be back. And so I'd like to have heard more of a sense of urgency about specific changes that they have to make philosophically. He did say things like, we're going to have to look at that, questions like, should Sean Manaea have been put back in the rotation sooner? We're going to have to look at that. Yeah, you're going to have to look at that. But I don't know. It was just a lot of the same stuff that we heard last offseason. Particularly, he got into outfield defense. He said that the outfield defense was really bad in 2022, which I think we all know. And then he said it was better this year, but it still wasn't good enough. And, part one of my answer to that is you put it together. Conforto, Haniger, Yastrzemski, Slater, you put that group together. So why did you do it? And if it's not good enough, what happened? Why was it not good enough? And then there's the other question of Mitch Haniger has 2 more years left on his contract. And Michael Conforto could opt in to come back. And I think a lot of people think he will opt out, but it's not an easy decision. It's an $18 million guarantee, and he did not have a great year. So he could easily opt in. And then suddenly you're looking at Haniger in a corner, Conforto in a corner, and then Yaz and Slater are arbitration eligible players. And I think both have I think both clearly have enough value to be tendered contracts. And he did touch on this topic as well, which was specifically a question was asked about tender decisions with J.D. Davis and Slater and Yastrzemski. And it was how do you get better when you're probably going to be committed to bringing back a lot of the same guys? And that's a kind of fair question, except I've said this before. I say this I've said this recently, that they have a lot of the pieces of what could be a winning team. I think a Yaz, a Slater, a J.D. Davis, a Tyro Estrada, Lamont Wade, all these kind of guys who are mediocre to a little bit better than that, or even in Tyro's case, maybe a lot better than that. If you're factoring in defense and base running and stuff, those are all you're not just gonna have a Bryce Harper at every position. If you add, I've said this, Aaron Judge and Bryce Harper and Kevin Gausman, to the 2023 Giants, and take out your 3 weakest players, you might win 95 games, 96 plus games, And so I don't think that bringing those guys back is like part of the problem. And Zaidi said that. He said he thinks that they're part of the solution, and I agree. But it's like where if Conforto opts in and Haniger is already back and you tender contracts to Yaz and Slater, as I think they obviously should. I think it's an easy decision that they should. Then how do you improve the outfield defense when you've already got 4 outfielders locked in place, and those are the 4 that you're saying weren't good enough? And so that's where you start to think about trades. You also consider Conforto may opt out, and then that allows you to do something there. But, Kevin Kiermaier was out there last offseason, very athletic. Cody Bellinger was out there last offseason, very athletic. And they didn't land those guys, and they brought in players with injury histories. And so why should anyone be surprised that granted, the outfield defense was better because there was less jock, essentially. And I honestly am like forgetting who even played the other positions outside of Yaz and Slater. But anyway, so the outfield defense and athleticism is a priority, but they said that last year. He said the exact same thing last year. But this time is different in a way because he's entering the last year of his contract. And I just think like it's do or die time for him. And ownership's not going to be, if they have the same kind of season this year or next year that they had the last 2 years, he's gone. And so there's big incentive to shake things up probably for Zaidi. So coming up in just a minute, more from this interview that Farhan Zaidi did with the media in the dugout today, including the future of the shortstop position. It was very interesting what he had to say there. And there's one guy who potentially helps with the athleticism in the outfield, but how does he fit in? So we'll get into all of that in just a minute. And before we do, today's episode is brought to you by our good friends over at FanDuel. Snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets whether you win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there is no better time to get in on the action. The app is super easy to use, and there's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. And of course, it's not just football. You can bet on the MLB postseason, which is starting today. And again, the Giants aren't in it, which is just unacceptable. But looking at the 49ers, who are 4-0, and their upcoming game against the Dallas Cowboys, 49ers are favored, and the odds there to win at -188. The spread at -3.5 with -110 odds, and the over/under set at 45. So that's what I'm looking at. I'm a 49ers guy. I'm like a casual, but still fun to see those guys doing so well, and favorites again in their upcoming game against Dallas. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, here we go. We are going to get into the rest of what Farhan Zaidi had to say, meeting with the media today. It was, like I said, I wanted to hear a little bit more, not humility necessarily, but like admission of the unwatchability of the product at, for basically the second half of the season. You could have just turned off the TV, frankly, after June 25th, and you would have been better off. Because the Giants were unwatchable for half of the year. And, Zaidi has said that ownership is, very unhappy with the product on the field, and it's kind of I wouldn't say a miracle, but it's he probably should feel fortunate that he wasn't canned along with Kapler. But I have gone over why I believe, like I mentioned, all those players like Estrada and Yastrzemski and J.D. Davis and Lamont Wade, they acquired those guys in trades for like nothing. And some of them are really good. Like Estrada is a really good player and possibly an extension candidate, which is something we'll get into for sure over the offseason. And some of his free agent signings have been really good, like Kevin Gausman, Carlos Rodon, Wilmer Flores, some of them not so good. La Stella, Haniger so far, and Conforto was mediocre. Some of those extensions for pitchers like Wood and DeSclafani, Stripling, Manaea, certainly some bad moves, but also some really good ones. I mean, like Gausman, they basically made Gausman a superstar, but then they didn't bring him back. He wanted to come back and they didn't do it. That's the mistake. But there's still like, if you had just done that, then you'd be in a very different position. And if you had just landed Bryce Harper or Carlos Correa or both, you'd be in a very different position. So like, there's just a few major moves that if they get made, I think this team is in a much different spot. So aggressiveness is going to be, I think, important this offseason. And it's do or die, like I said, last year of his contract. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Everydayers, tomorrow on the show, more that's going to come out about the Giants' managerial search and kind of analysis from this Farhan Zaidi interview. And also, we're going to, at some point, address Brandon Crawford and his future. But speaking of which, Farhan Zaidi was straight up asked, like, what do you, with Brandon Crawford's contract expiring, what do you see for the Giants at shortstop moving forward? Like, what's the plan? What's going to happen there? And his exact quote was, if I can find it, as we sit here now, we want to give Marco Luciano the chance to be the everyday guy next year, end quote. So very clear language there. And part of me immediately goes to like, that's what they said about David Villar. He's the incumbent third baseman. And how did that go? It lasted a couple weeks and then he was gone, like never to be heard from again. Which just goes to show you, right? David Villar was the MVP of the Pacific Coast League last year. And he's kind of an afterthought now after a little bit of big league time. So Marco Luciano obviously has been a much more highly regarded prospect than David Villar. So it's not a fair comparison, but I can't help but have flashbacks to those comments about Villar. But I mean, and Zaidi also talked about how they wish, Luciano got injured after they sent him down after like 4 games in the major leagues, which was annoying. And then he got injured. And Farhan Zaidi said, they wish they had more time to look at him, but that they were really basically impressed with what they saw. And I agree. I was impressed too. I thought he played a really solid shortstop, wasn't perfect, and had some really quality at bats. Wasn't perfect, a lot of strikeouts, but you see the potential. And I think he's 20. He's either 21 or 22, and has been a very highly regarded prospect throughout his development, basically for years since the Giants signed him as like a 16-year-old. So anyway, he didn't say Brandon Crawford's going to come back. He straight up just said Marco Luciano. And so that was a clear indication that they don't plan on bringing Brandon Crawford back, which shouldn't be a surprise, but still noteworthy nonetheless. He also said regarding the outfield defense that it was a priority, and that he mentioned Tyler Fitzgerald, who, again, why didn't we get a look at him sooner if you really feel like he's part of the solution there? He said that Fitzgerald may be the best center fielder defensively in the organization. And am I remembering this wrong? I believe Fitzgerald was just an infielder, and they moved him to the outfield recently, and now they're already calling him the best center fielder in the organization. So that kind of reminds me of Mauricio Dubon, who was an infielder. They moved him to the outfield, and he became a really good center fielder. And he continues to add value to that Houston Astros team. It's not a star, but they talking about defense. Why'd they let him go? I defended the decision at the time, and he was out of options, and they had, it basically came down to Estrada or Dubon, and they went with Estrada, which I think was definitely the right move. Estrada is a better player, but others pointed out, and in hindsight, I agree. I didn't agree at the time, but the question was why are you? Because I think it was to activate Tommy La Stella, they needed to make room, and the problem was, why are you signing these guys with two bum Achilles? Why are you signing a Mitch Haniger with such an injury history, and Michael Conforto coming off, missing a whole season with an injury and such, so there's all kinds of examples like that. And it is, somebody asked in a mailbag question, saying one thing and doing another. Well, time is going to run out on that. If he doesn't actually do what he says he's going to do this offseason, and then the product on the field next year is the same as what we've seen the last couple years, then he's not going to be given an extension, and we'll get a new person running the team. But for now, I think Farhan understands that. And so I do expect that things will be done a little bit differently, if not a lot differently, this offseason. One more thing to mention from this presser is that he was talking about next year's starting rotation, talking about how they won't be really looking for starting pitching depth. And I agree with the premise, which is of the answer, which is we already have Logan Webb, and then he said Alex Cobb, and he said Kyle Harrison, and he said, Stripling and Manaea could both be back, depending on their decisions. Stripling has said he will be back. I expect Manaea to opt out. And then he said, plus we have a lot of other guys, other young guys, like Keaton Wynn and Tristan Beck. They've got rotation depth. He was saying if there's front end of the rotation type talent available, that's something they're going to be interested in. And there's a lot of that available this offseason, a lot of it. That's what the strength of the free agent market is. But my point was that Alex Cobb has a club option. And so Farhan basically indicated right there that they're intending to pick it up by naming Alex Cobb as a member of next year's rotation. So that's not a surprise to me. It's really an $8 million decision, $10 million option with a $2 million buyout. And the only thing is the hip injury. And we'll have to see what happens there. But basically, breaking news, they intend to bring back Alex Cobb, which I think is a good thing for sure. Anyway, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked on Giants your first listen every day, everydayers. Tomorrow, like I said, more about this presser and kind of the analysis that comes out in the aftermath and any news and rumors and reports that come out. I do anticipate that as the Giants' managerial search gets underway. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out a lot, so thank you in advance, and thanks to everyone who's done so already. Can't wait to be with you again tomorrow. Thanks again for listening. Today, you are now Locked on Giants.